Hello, darling Lean Girls, and a big welcome to the Lean Girl Fitcast, your place for motivation and mindset mastery on your fitness and fat loss journey. We are a couple weeks into the last part of the year, and it is so easy to slip into the screw it mentality, that all or nothing mindset that says if we can't be perfect because there are going to be festivities, there are going to be indulgences, then you know what? This is going to be a 2 to 3 week all. So that's where it is go time, and every single opportunity that you get, you basically are eating yourself into a food coma. Not a lovely place to be. So how do we go into the festive season having a little bit more balance, even though we know things are not going to be, in inverted commas, perfect, and we may be indulging a little bit more than usual? But how do we actually indulge in a way that's firstly enjoyable, and secondly not flip that little switch that happens in our head that actually has us walking into January on the back foot? Because for a lot of us listening to this podcast, we have fat loss goals, and perhaps there are a couple of kilos that we want to lose. Now we're going to head into January with an extra couple kilos, which we certainly don't want. So how do we go about not going into that old bad habit of saying, you know what, screw it, I'm going to be so good in January, so I'm going to be super bad now? And so I have Gillan Gork in the house today, bringing his mindset and motivation tools into the mix. And we are going to apply it to this mindset that I know that we can even relate to when it comes to the weekends, right? We can still, I know that I'm like giving Gillan secrets here. I'm like, I know that you can also slip into the screw it mentality, but I think that we all can. And I think that this applies to the weekends. It can apply to just a period in your life, and of course to the festive season as well.
Yeah, I guess for me, I relate to it in terms of like the small moments, the small little decisions. Instead of being like, screw it, this whole holiday, I'm going to... my experience of it is that is that when I say screw it in like a little moment, then the next little moment I'm more likely to say screw it as well. So it like becomes like a bad habit of just giving in to my cravings.
But I think, you know what feeds into that is I often say when you feel like a blob, you act like a blob. And so now I'm already not feeling good. So I'm just going to have more, and I'm just going to have more. And I think that's what we're going to get into. At what point do we realize that more is still not going to make, if the third piece of chocolate didn't make you feel good, do you think the fourth one has suddenly got this magic ingredient that's going to fix everything?
Yeah.
And if I look back to a lot of the festive seasons, I think I can proudly say in the past 3 or 4 years, I've worked a lot on this, but I used to be arriving at some kind of festive feast, sometimes having restricted. So I was actually so hungry, and then I would get there and I would be eating like it was my job. Like I was being paid to eat as much as possible. And there was absolutely no restraint. And I must say, I don't think I was even mindfully enjoying the food. It was almost like I was trying to get something out of it, and more was just more. And I would eat like not even the things that looked that appealing to me. It was just, I would eat until I basically could not pop another little chocolate ball into my mouth. And then, of course, there would be feelings of guilt and feeling terrible. And when you're not feeling good about yourself, especially if you have that old way of thinking to be like, oh, well, food is actually something that makes me feel good. So then we go the next meal and we do the same thing. Or then it's some more alcohol. And then it's we're always craving these things outside of ourselves. And I think a huge shift for me has been able to go into a festive celebration, have a look at all the wonderful food, choose the things that really look good to me. And what I've started to realize is that feeling good is actually more important to me. And being able to enjoy food and enjoy all of the indulgences and stop at a point where I feel comfortably full, I'm satisfied, I've enjoyed lovely things that maybe are high calorie or whatever, like that is actually a much better place to be versus sitting there and getting so uncomfortably full, like basically moving yourself into a food coma, and then you feel guilty on top of it.
It's tricky because a lot of people will engage in this undesirable behavior, but it's because they believe that it will make them feel good.
Correct.
So the assumption that people actually are doing it knowing that they're going to feel bad. Somewhere in the back of their mind, there is the knowledge that, okay, like I might regret this. But in the moment, the draw towards pleasure is so strong. And this, of course, is what can make us go, just, oh, fuck it. Because I so badly want that pleasure. And so this is what we're up against. Everything we do in life, everything is because we feel that it's going to make us feel good, or that we're going to have some kind of happiness. And we're all looking for unconditional, everlasting happiness. I mean, some people even will have a miserable life because they think in the afterlife they're then going to be happy. So we land up, all of our actions and decisions and behaviors are because we're looking for some kind of happiness. But unfortunately, if you really look back and examine all the patterns in our lives, I know this is true of my life, I know of yours, and everybody listening, if you just think back and say to yourself, wow, did anything in my past that I attained or achieved give me unconditional, forever lasting happiness? And the answer is no.
No, this goes back to our very first episode where we were talking about reaching a number on the scale and how there is this illusion that suddenly once I hit that number, I'm going to be happy.
Yes.
And that goes for the festive food. We think, okay, if I just have one more this, one more that, we're going to now suddenly feel like it's enough.
Exactly. So somewhere in the background, we know there's that faint little voice that's saying, like, you will probably regret this. But the voice that's really at the fore, this feeling, is no, when I have this, I'll feel just happy enough to then stop. But that's not how it works, right? I know that when I eat chocolate, and I love chocolate, so this is a good example for me, maybe not a good example if somebody listening to this doesn't enjoy chocolate.
He loves a good top deck.
But if I've got that top deck chocolate in front of me, I just think to myself, I'm just going to have this piece, and after this piece, I'll feel satiated, I'll feel happy enough to then exercise self-control. The amount of happiness that it gives me is probably less than 10 seconds after the last little bit of chocolate goes down my throat and is no longer in my mouth. And because I enjoyed that so much, suddenly I'm craving the next one. And it's that craving that makes me unhappy, and I think that I'll be happy when I have that next one. And before I know it, I've eaten an entire slab. So in each one, I'm like, screw it. I'm just going to have one more. So, but in the back of my head, what I've found to be really helpful for me is to bring that voice that's in the background, that faint voice, and to really practice bringing that into the foreground. Knowing that really by saying screw it, I will be, let me just quench this thirst now. Really what that behavior itself is doing is like trying to quench our thirst by drinking salt water. Every single gulp, a nice cold glass of salt water, well, maybe for a brief moment, it feels refreshing, but very quickly we're even thirstier than we were before. So the technique, for lack of a better term here, is mindfulness. It's observing when a sense of craving comes in, and really bringing that voice from the background to remind ourselves that everything that has the nature to arise has the nature to pass away. And that means that not only will any craving that you're feeling that has arisen pass away, but it also means that if you act on that craving, even the pleasure that you get will arise, and quicker than you'd like, it will also pass away. So if you knew that everything was temporary, would you really take that action knowing that the pleasure it's going to give you is so fleeting? And I think it's just a good thing to be mindful of. So that's the practice, is really just the mindfulness of it.
I love that analogy of the salt water, because I can just imagine that. And, again, going back to our festive table and thinking, okay, just a little bit more, having just another helping. And actually from the point where you were already satisfied and you were already feeling comfortably full, you're not getting anything more. And I think that realizing that is just it's sabotage, at the end of the day. And what I also love to remind myself of is that food's number one purpose is to nourish our bodies. And of course, there are many other reasons that we eat. We eat for enjoyment, we eat for pleasure, we eat for all of that. And sometimes when you are satisfied, you are full, that is your body's signal of saying, okay, like now let's direct our focus onto something else. And I think it's in that little moment, because I definitely know from experience, if you have been someone who has had a binge eating history, that it is almost like it's a switch that gets flipped, and then it is just, you almost like don't even see, you just go. And I think the key is in that moment to be able to pause. And as you've said, ask yourself, is this a saltwater moment that I'm having here? Is more really going to do anything more for me? And so, I really, really love that.
Yeah. And, we've got different contexts in our lives where we have some, we crave things sometimes more or less than others. And it's really helpful to practice this on the small things so that when the bigger things come along, that it doesn't seem so daunting. And so the small things is just very subtle observation of like even your own thoughts. Like, are you having the same thoughts now than you did 10 seconds ago? Probably they're different thoughts. And so if we just start to notice how thoughts come and go, and just every once in a while, set a reminder on your phone. This is what I tell a lot of the people who I work with. Set a reminder on your phone to just have a mindful moment and to notice how whatever you're thinking and feeling in this moment was different to an hour ago. So thoughts, emotions, also just understand that emotions also pass through us like weather patterns. So we can notice that as well. It's
like an urge. It's basically like an urge that you get. And often if you can just distract yourself for a short amount of time where I'm not going to act on this urge right now to go and overeat or eat another portion or go and get that chocolate out the fridge that I already feel like I've had enough of. If you give it a bit of time, sometimes just that pause, and before you know it, it just feels so much
and so
lighter.
I'll add to that, because we've spoken, in terms of just being mindful of our thoughts and emotions and how they change. And then a really great time to actually anchor this practice is when you are feeling a craving for something. And just notice how, when you don't act on that craving, try and see if you can become aware of the moment that craving actually dissipates. And what you'll probably find, which I know this is true when I practice this, is that the moment it goes away, you just feel like this sense of relief, like you've just suddenly been let go out of the grip of something. And there's a great sense of contentment and inner peace that comes with having no craving. A far deeper one that is not only healthier, but just when we experience this more and more in our lives, we feel a sense of freedom and liberation and contentment and inner peace.
I don't have
that
to go
acting
with
on the cravings, the satisfaction that we get from acting on the craving is so fleeting before suddenly we're craving again. And it's nowhere near as deep and powerful as the satisfaction that we get the moment we're out of the grips of that craving from not acting on it. So just notice the next time you're craving something, before you go screw it, take a little bit of time and just notice the moment that craving dissipates and how good that feels. And if you did, for example, eat that piece of chocolate, or you had that mince pie, because you had the craving for it and you thought to yourself, oh, when I have one, then I'll be happy. Okay, so notice, you've eaten it, notice the moment where you're feeling, that feels great, I'm enjoying it while you're eating it. And then see if you can notice how quickly that craving then comes back again. Don't try and induce the craving purposefully for this, but it will probably come back again.
Yes.
And then remind yourself, you see, these cravings will come and go. And in fact, acting on them doesn't make them go away. So what we're doing is we're turning our experience into an immersive laboratory, like the lab of your life, where you can just experiment and play around with this. Because it's one thing conceptually to know this because Gilan and Angie said it on a podcast, but when you actually experience this, you turn your knowing from a conceptual, intellectual knowing to a felt experience of this. And that's always more powerful when you really know that screw it, I'm just going to go into it, is not going to actually make it go away.
And there are just two things that I'd love to add to this is, firstly, we are certainly not saying don't indulge this festive season. It's all about, this is the time of the year which we'll discuss in our next episode, where sometimes it is perfectly fine. Take a break from, striving for that calorie deficit. Enjoy a phase of maintenance. Enjoy all of the indulgent food and move your focus toward having fun with your family and your friends and being festive. So it's certainly not about restriction either, but it's about finding that beautiful middle balance in between by indulging, but in a way that makes you feel good. And the second thing that I wanted to note is we had discussed around social media. And I think that it's such a good example and one that we can all relate to, of us just having that craving to pick up your phone, to look at social media. And I think that there's so many correlations between this and that craving for, food. It's like that little hit that we're trying to get. And so maybe that would actually be a nice way of practicing in a context that's not food related, is how many times a day, and I'll put my hand up here that you can't see, you won't see it, but guilty as charged, let me just look at what's happening on social media, and before you know it, 2 hours are gone and you've been on TikTok watching, monkey videos.
You're thinking to yourself, oh, when I just see one more interesting thing, then I'll
wait.
put my phone down.
Yes.
And we're just scrolling and we're like, oh, that was interesting, but not interesting enough. Let me look for something really interesting. And then the 2 hours goes by and we just keep thinking that I'll be satiated. My craving will go away when this kind of content comes up or when something comes up that makes me feel satiated. And it never does.
It never does. And you get to the end of those 2 hours and how do you feel? You feel yuck. You're like, oh, I just wasted so much of my time.
Yeah, that's the salt water.
It's the salt water, yeah. Exactly. So I think that that's a nice little technique.
That's a great context to practice it.
A great context, because we all have smartphones that walk around with us all day and we're all so susceptible to that. So
and when you do give in to the craving, in any context, again, just practice kindness to yourself.
Yes,
and instead of saying, oh, well, now I did this, then you go and before you know it,
you're trying to comfort
you're totally
yourself.
unmindful. The trick is then become even more mindful. So the minute you go into it, then notice how it may feel good in the moment, or maybe not, but then notice how short-lived that is. And again, you're just practicing, experiencing how everything is short-lived. Cravings are short-lived. The pleasure of acting on the craving is short-lived. The only thing that is stable, long-lasting, unconditional is our ability to let go of these things and rest in a place where we're not requiring anything outside of ourselves to make us feel good inside. Because that's really where the craving comes from seeking.
And I think that that's a great nuance and reminder to be kind when you catch yourself, because I find as soon as I berate myself or I feel guilty about it, it does almost perpetuate the cycle. But when I think, geez, Ant, well done, you caught yourself there, it's a different feeling tone, which I think is then encourages you to catch yourself more and become more mindful, versus now it's a guilt shame storm, which we definitely don't want. So I really love that. And I think that is going to be a very helpful way to not let us flip that switch into, go time on the desserts, to be able to enjoy ourselves with more balance over the festive season. Great. And so, yeah, thank you. So and from a practical perspective, I think that that's really practical as well. So noticing those cravings and seeing how long they last.
Non-judgmental awareness. That is the technique that we're saying. If you just observe, then you will know to be true that everything that arises has the nature to pass away. And just observing that will help you to make the right decision. And I bet after enough observing, you'll just become bored with that game of chasing after whatever the craving is pointing you to try and feel okay inside. And that natural balance will just start to emerge.
And I think you'll also be walking into January feeling a lot more confident and a lot more in control and a lot more calm and less triggered and just jumping all over the place looking for these quick wins to satisfy those cravings. And so I really hope that this is going to give you a beautiful new perspective shift heading into the festive, indulgent, fun season. And our next episode, we are going to be covering similar, but actually the opposite to this. So you may be feeling like you've made some progress over the past couple of months months, you've maybe had some fat loss results, and you could be going into the festive season feeling, geez, I don't want to go out of my deficit. I want to continue making this progress, or have a lot of fear around maybe gaining fat back or losing progress. And so we want to talk about that mindset too, which I know is a very common one, especially if you have been working really hard. There can be fear around that. So how do we go into the festive season once again looking for this beautiful place of balance where we can enjoy ourselves, indulge, and have peace of mind that we aren't going to be losing our progress? So I really hope that you enjoyed this one. Thank you, babe, for your lovely contribution here. We look forward to our next podcast, and please do not forget to share this episode. Comment down below if you enjoyed it, if you feel like it gave you an extra tool in your toolbox. We love to hear from you, and it really helps the podcast if you show us some love as well and share it to all of your friends who are also on a fat loss or fitness journey. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you here next week for the very last episode of 2023.